Welcome back, everyone. So we are here for the Q&A. I know we are starting a little late. If any of you are a bit did not catch the end of the last session, I ran late, but I think that the relationships in chronic illness was so important that I didn't want to losing my train of thought. I did not want to miss anything. So sorry about that, but here we are. So we have less time for a Q&A, but go ahead and put your questions in, and I will see if do my best to answer them. I will, as I started the previous session with, I am not very good at this. I'm not. I have not figured this out, and so I hope that I can help. But we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Okay. Haley asks, can I think of any fiction books that have comforted me during times of chronic illness? Yes. Good question. I like that question. I'll talk about books for forever, which I'll cut myself off today so I can answer more questions. But well, they honestly don't have to do with illness. The books that have most comforted me while I've been sick, but in a lot of ways, they have really touched me. Some of them are the Ilion Chronicles by J.L. Knight. Jace is a character in that series, and he is really... I've read the series over and over and over again as I've been sick, and we're currently waiting for the newest book to come, the last book to come out. But Jace's journey and his story, to me, are so relatable in what I've gone through with illness. And even though it's totally different from my life, it's been still so encouraging to me. Another series that really has encouraged me is The Blades of Akhtar by Trisha Mingrink. And she is so... again, her characters are just so real, and they're, it's fantasy. They're going through totally different situation than I am, but it's still very relatable to me. And, they get to the point where they're just broken and they have to figure out how to live when things are not going their way. And that seems like every book, but those two series they really do a great job of it. And I also liked recently Porch Swing Girl by Taylor Bennett, because she, the book is about a girl who's going through mourning and learning how to live and struggling with another trial that's stacked on top of one. And so in a lot of ways, it was just so healing, because it's so, the mourning, I think, is something that a lot of people who are ill have to do continually. Chronic illness does require continual mourning of things that you lost and that you're continuing to lose. Okay, I could go on and on, but I'll stop there. Those are the few things that come off the top of my head. I'm a nonfiction writer, but I process life through fiction. Kind of weird, but that's me. You'll know that if you read my book. I mention lots of fiction references. I'm very proud of them. I'm unashamed. Jody says, Jody says, I feel so detached from God and don't feel like I've changed much since this all started. And I don't feel his presence. I feel walls. I feel alone, and I find it hard to say good things about him. Oh, Jody, I'm so sorry. It's so hard. You said I've changed so much since all this started, and I'm going to be talking about that in my session later today. So I won't go into that right now. And we'll talk about how chronic illness changes us and how to deal with that later. So I won't go into that right now. But as for not feeling his presence and feeling walls, you're not the only one. I think that probably everyone here, but definitely me anyway, can testify to the fact that I've felt that. I know I come on here and I seem all smiley and all cheerful and all, it's easy to speak about these things because I want you all to believe them. I want you to know these truths are yours and you can have them. And I am passionate about that. And I have watched so many people struggle, and I want you to have this truth. But the thing is, for myself, I struggle to believe them sometimes. I can write a blog post and talking about how God, you're not alone, and how God's grace is sufficient, and how it's going to end. And then, I'll finish writing a blog post and immediately switch to just feeling like, so dejected and so struggling myself, and thinking, struggling to believe the things that I'm telling you guys for myself. And so I understand feeling far away from God. Right now it's easy because it can seem easy because I've been praying for this conference nonstop for weeks and months. And I kind of, there's spiritual highs and spiritual lows. And when you're in a low, it can be hard and you can feel separated from God. And even if you keep reaching out and reaching out and reaching out, but like yesterday, we talked about the sun and the clouds. The sun is there, even if the clouds are completely skewing it from our vision. And it's not going to be, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Feeling far away doesn't mean from God, doesn't mean that you are a failing Christian. There are spiritual highs and spiritual lows. There's the mountaintops, and then there's the valleys, and then there's the, in between, where there's all kinds of different emotions and feelings. So that doesn't mean that you're a bad Christian. Keep seeking God. Keep bringing your questions to God. Keep knocking. Keep knocking at the walls, and they're going to come down eventually. And the spiritual highs and lows, and it goes up and down, but it's going to get better. I know that's easy again to say, but it's going to get better. I say this having been there, where I felt like a failing Christian. I felt so far away from God. I felt detached from God. I felt like, because I was, depressed and anxious, that I couldn't, that I was just not doing things right. But I say that having been there, and I can testify for myself and through so many other stories of people I've talked to, that you are not alone and in this struggle, but that it is going to get better. So keep being faithful now, even when it feels quiet, even when you feel detached, and it will get better, okay? It will get better. Oh, Bethany makes a great point about the books, about books. Like I said, I process the world through fiction books. I process the world through writing as well, and, prayer and those things. But fiction books are really how I process the world. And she says that sometimes the books you read will feed the lies you are believing. And that's so important. Maybe it's not books for you. Maybe it's TV shows or certain people or certain activities. And it's important to know what affects you. And for me, books. So when I read books that are very real and raw, but still hopeful, that really helps me, and that helps me process what I'm going through, and that helps point me to God. But at the same time, when I read, I also have to be careful, because if I'm in a certain mindset because of my illness and I read something that I'd be fine reading otherwise or something, but that is confirming a lie that I'm believing, it can be very detrimental. So know what affects you and be very careful about that. Amanda says, I'm still trying to run away from my illnesses. I try to distract myself with whatever I can, but when I'm left to my thoughts, I daydream or read fiction or sing. Anything to take me away. Is that wrong? By doing that, I feel like I often lose opportunities to speak with God and spend time with Him. Good question. I wrote a blog post about this. Actually, Hope When It Hurts, the book that the last speakers from last night wrote, was what inspired this. But a few months ago, I think this year sometime, I wrote a blog post about that, about how, what are distractions okay? And I think that it depends. Sorry. It depends. Yes. When it's okay. You have to go through an acceptance period where you can accept you are sick. And if you're not in that yet, then you can you'll get there eventually. Just keep trying to balance. Try to be balanced. But if you are in pain and you just need a distraction, that's okay. Distractions are okay for a time as long as they're not forever. Distractions are okay if your body needs time to, or your brain needs time to register the shock or the grief or the whatever it is. If you need distraction until you are in a place where you can handle it, then that's fine. But if you're using it to get to that place where you can handle it, distractions are can sometimes be healthy, because I know that we just can't handle everything all the time. But if you are using it forever and it's a constant distraction and you never work it out, it's just going to cause more difficulties and brokenness later. So I would try to be balanced. Try to know where you're at and be balanced. Confession. This conference is a distraction for me. It's more than a distraction. It's not just a distraction for the sake of a distraction. It's something that God is using, and that God is using in me to draw myself closer to Him and to teach me things that I needed to know. But but the busyness of planning this conference, I didn't intend for it to be a distraction, but it ended up being something that helped numb some pain that I was going through and processing, that I wasn't ready for, that I couldn't handle at the time. But the conference has helped distract me in some ways. The word I don't think is the best word for it, but it's helped me to keep moving and keep functioning even when so I'm being totally honest here. So yeah, vulnerability, people. But yeah, so it's something that has helped me to process some other pain that I've been trying to work through myself. So distractions are fine, as long as can sometimes be healthy, as long as they don't last forever. That would be what I would say. Jody, you said, oh, I missed my thing. Just a second. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I scrolled too far. Jody, you said you'd be interested in talking to me more about mold. Go ahead. You can just reply to the emails you've been getting as you're registered, and I would be happy to talk to you further once the conference is over. Haley says, yes, I read Esther Smith's book on grief and chronic illness. I did too. That was so helpful for me. She has some great wisdom to share there. If you remember her session from yesterday, if you missed her session yesterday, don't worry. They're all going to be recorded. You will get access to them soon. But yes, Esther Smith's book on grief and chronic illness is something I definitely recommend for those who are grieving. Yeah. I read it. It's really good. Yes. She has some great also like activities, like not just like some journaling things and some questions to think through that can help you process it. I don't know I'm not an expert on grief. I'm still learning myself, but I know that there's a lot of good books, and Esther Smith's book is probably a great place to start, because she's talking specifically about chronic illness. Also, actually, on Goodreads, I'm just SG Willoughby on Goodreads. I have recently made a bookshelf about mourning and grieving. So I've not read most of those books, just be warned. So I can't vouch for them, but I've been recommended them. And if you need some ideas and want to look into some stuff, I would suggest that. Haley says, I definitely feel like a hypocrite sometimes. So encouraging others, but not believing and practicing what I'm saying myself. Yeah, well, I obviously struggle with that, as I already mentioned. It's easy to tell people these truths, and then it's hard I know they're true, but then when it comes to applying them myself, sometimes I need other people to tell them to me, and I struggle. But as long as you're open with others about your struggles, I think it's still okay. Like I said, I'm struggling still, but here are the truths that I know are real, that I'm trying so hard to believe for myself. So any other last questions? We still have a few minutes. gracefully overcoming. Go rest. You can watch it in the recorded version, or hop on later for some more live stuff. So yeah, definitely don't crash yourself on this conference. It's supposed to be uplifting, not otherwise. But. Oh, and again, from the last session, they're not on the website yet, but I will email it to you, and by the end of this conference, there will be links on the website to groups that you can where you can find other people in a similar situation, similar who can relate. Find the chronic illness community. Yes, English is good, people. Any questions? Any last questions? Haley says, one time, either in a blogger or your book, you talked about resting physically versus resting emotionally. I really resonated with me, but I can't remember much now. Yes, resting is important for anyone who has chronic illness, for sure. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But like you said, actually, that was in a video that I did. But it's resting. It's important to understand resting, and I devoted a whole chapter about resting to my book. He's Making Diamonds: A Teen's Thoughts on Faith Through Chronic Illness. So I would suggest reading that for anyone who hasn't. But resting is important to. It's important to understand that resting. There's different kinds of resting. You need to make sure that you're resting physically and emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. And those things can be different. Resting, going for a walk can help me rest mentally, but it doesn't help me rest physically. And watching a movie can help me rest physically and perhaps emotionally, but not always mentally, depending on how involved the movie is. So what rests you in some ways might not rest you in other ways. And it's important to balance all of those 4 areas in chronic illness and everything, physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. Those all are very important in resting. And so you need to make sure that you are rest all of them. Understand that what rests some parts might not rest other parts. How do you get rid of false guilt, thinking the illness and repercussions are my fault? Good question, Krista. I would say that you need to repeat God's truth to yourself. Tessa gave a lot of great verses yesterday in her session, and all of these ladies are giving great biblical truths. And so getting rid of it, I would just bring it to God, say, and sorry, brain fog. Bring it to God and remind yourself of the truth. Look at that verse, the verse where'd it go? Hang on, I shall find it. In just a second. Maybe I won't find it. That verse I read earlier about, here we go. 2 Corinthians 7:10 says, godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death. 2 Corinthians 7:10 is a great verse. Write these verses down, put them on Post-it notes, make them your screensaver, whatever, so that you can remind yourself of them over and over again, memorize them so that when those lies come in, they're just like any other lies. And I'm going to talk about how to defeat lies in my next session later today. But it's important to know that the way you defeat lies is through truth. And false guilt is a lie. And so remind yourself of those verses. Remind yourself of 2 Corinthians 7:10. Remind yourself of 2 Corinthians 12:9, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Remind yourself, look up all the verses about God's grace, about how you are justified, about how, all of those things, and remind yourself of those truths, because really false guilt is a lie. And so the way to defeat lies is with truth. So I would definitely do that. And Anne says John 9:1-12, which I don't know by memory, so I'm not sure what verse that is. But yeah, it's the Bible, so any verses are good. Yes, and so hopefully that helps you. Anne also says, has the link to session 7 been posted? I can't find it in my emails. About that, last night we had so many people register that we had technical difficulties in sending that last email out, and I am so sorry about that. It will definitely be in the recorded version and in the recorded collection of recorded sessions, so you'll be able to access it that way. I'm so sorry about that. About the sun-born blind. Yes. Yeah, great. Another thought about, nope, never mind. The thought left me. Any more questions? We have just a few more minutes here, so. Any questions? Any questions? Can be about the session we talked about, or just questions in general. Anything at all. This is the last Q&A I'm personally doing. There'll be more Q&As today, but this is the last Q&A I'm personally doing, so it's a good time to ask any questions. And if you think of anything later that you want to talk to me or any of the speakers further about, in the study guide, the free study guide, there is links to all of our websites where you can contact us, or if you want to follow up with me, you can just reply to the emails you've been getting with these session links. There's also, I want to make sure that everyone remembers that on the website, there are some really awesome freebies. Some of the Chronic Joy has provided some freebies. If you remember her talking about them yesterday, remember Pamela talking about them yesterday. The study guide, the free study guide made specifically for the conference, is also a freebie. There's a link to all of these things on the website where you registered, or in the emails you've been getting. And another freebie that we're giving away that anyone can go download is provided by Caitlin. And she is the author of Even If Not, and she's great. And she's provided this beautiful graphic that you can print out that's designed based on this verse, and it's full color, and it's amazing. So I would definitely go make sure you get that. And giveaways, we're giving away 7 books, all from the speakers. I'm giving away a copy of my book. Chronic Joy is giving away a book. And we're giving away a copy of Hope When It Hurts, and we're giving away Your Choice of one of Isabella's books, and some more books. Oh, and a copy of Coffee Shop Devos. And my mind is blanking on the others, but it's awesome. There's books. I like books, so make sure that you enter the giveaway. Yeah. So we still have a few minutes. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in. Any last questions? Yeah, I know. I can print stuff, but not in color. But I think that you can probably do it at your local. There's usually local stores that do that, Jody. Any questions? Or I could smile at you. Mm-hmm. Feel free to enter your questions. What inspired you to start writing about chronic illness? Bethany says. Good question. I was writing already regularly. Writing was just who I was at that point when I got sick, and illness made writing difficult. But it was kind of just natural to progress to writing about that. And really, what made me start it is when I looked around and thought I was all alone, and I wanted someone to talk to me about these spiritual things and talk to me about these questions and these struggles and all of that. And I wanted practical tips, and I wanted all of these things, and I couldn't at the time find any. And since then, I've discovered a whole online chronic illness community that's amazing. But at the time, I felt alone, and so I thought, well, if no one else is doing it, then I might as well do it. And through that, I've met a lot of people and have felt much less alone, and I've been able to share what I'm learning. And so yeah, it was really just I felt alone, and so I didn't want to. And so I thought, well, if no one else is, I will try. And so that's why I started my blog, and then my blog went for about, I'm not sure, I think it was around a year, give or take, before I started writing my book. And my book kind of came out of, as I wrote my blog and connected with other people, I heard, oh, they all have the same questions as me, and they all have the same struggles as me, and the same emotions, and I'm not the only one. And so, and I also honed my message as I continued to blog about it. So that's when my book came into being, and I drew a lot from my own struggles, from what people had shared with me that they were struggling with too, and what I'd already written in my blog, and adjusting it and making it more and more and making it more streamlined and applicable to everyone. Jody asks, what all do you deal with illness-wise? Good question. I have, so it started out, I was misdiagnosed with an autoimmune disease. And sorry, I got distracted by your lovely questions. So yeah, it started out, it's misdiagnosed with an autoimmune disease because really and then juvenile arthritis, and nobody really knew what was wrong. And, I did the whole doctor run where you go through a whole bunch. And then I finally landed on one naturopath who is able to, that was the 8-week thing that I was talking about yesterday, that I went back to 8 weeks. And so, again, I lost my train of thought. And so we went there for 9 months, and, we kept trying all these things, and nothing helped. And finally, it was totally God, because we had no idea that mold illness was a thing. We knew there was some mold in our house, but we had no idea that caused sickness, or especially like chronic illness like this. And one night my dad, who wouldn't usually be the person to do this, but he was like, do you think, he told my mom, do you think it's mold? And she's like, maybe. So they Googled the symptoms, and she's like, I think it is mold. And so that next day I happened to have a doctor appointment. So we went there, and we asked the naturopath, do you think that it could be this? And he's like, I think it could be. So he did some tests. He did some blood tests that day, and I never went home. From there, I went and I stayed at a family friend's house for the month that we were there, as my family, worked on getting everything set, and we moved from that house, which was thankfully a rental. And as we were there, we discovered more and more mold growing in the walls and all of those things. And it was, and so then from there we moved. We thought, well, we had friends in Montana who had they were running a kind of a missionary school, which is another story. But we moved there to Montana because we thought, oh, we'll just go there for 6 months or maybe a year, and I'll get better, and we'll see if that, and then we'll move back to Washington, because that's where we were at the time, is Washington, which is a very rainy and wet state. I loved Washington, but it's not quite good for mold. And we got to Montana, and it happened that the place where we moved also had lots of mold. And so from there, we moved to Arizona, where it's the desert and it's dry. And I've been getting so much better now that we're in Arizona, and we found a doctor that could help. And there's a bunch in between there. In the meantime, I also got diagnosed with multiple chemical sensitivity and Lyme disease, so all of the tests came back positive for the mold and the Lyme disease, and the multiple chemical sensitivity. I don't know if there's a test besides symptoms, but yeah. So those are the 3 things that I have: is mold, mold poisoning, multiple chemical sensitivity, and Lyme disease. And I'm doing much better at the moment than I was a year ago. But yeah, let's see. Bethany's mom says, what is the *1 thing a caregiver can do for an ill person? Good question. I have to think of like the *1 thing. That's hard. I have to think about that. *1 thing that very good question. I don't know. What do you guys think? You want to put in the chat what you think that the *1 thing a caregiver could do for an ill person is? I think that for me, just being there, which sounds cliche, but for me, just being there for me, whether it's praying for me or hugging me or sitting there with me or, asking me how I am, and not just how I am illness-wise, because I think I'm not a caregiver, so I'm not sure I want to I know I'm not quite. No, I don't know the answers to these things, but for me, I think being a caregiver, sometimes it can be so easy to get caught up in keeping the ill person alive and, helping them manage their symptoms. And it gets so focused on the sickness that sometimes it can be hard for caregivers and ill people themselves to see the broader person, and to see that they are not just an illness, that it's hard for everyone to remember that illness is not our identity. And I'll talk about that in my next session. But yeah, it's I think important for a caregiver to remember that they are a full person, and to not just take care of their an ill person's physical health, but also to do what they can to help them mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. I guess that's the one thing I would say, is to just be there and to remember that they are a whole person. Not just an illness. Kelly says, I'm watching you lose your train of thought at times, and you just go on with such acceptance. It's inspirational. Why, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure what to say to that, but thank you. The brain fog is very real, but I figured that of all people, you guys would understand, right? You guys would be able to understand the struggle. Heather says, I live in Washington and seriously pursuing living in Arizona. Cool. It's a big change. It's a very big change. I won't go further. I really miss Washington. I've learned to appreciate Arizona, but I loved living in Washington. It's just that my body did not love living in Washington. And Arizona is very different because it's the desert. It's quite different. Oh, cool. I did not know that, Krista. The genetic tests. Heather, you have Lyme disease and mold poisoning. Well, maybe, you know, Arizona might be helpful to get away from mold. I'll be praying for you. That's so hard. Krista says, caregivers somehow miraculously help us not feel like a burden. Oh, very true. And sitting with us, yeah, very true. We beat ourselves up all the time with these lies, and we hate being a burden, and especially to you caregivers, because you carry most of that burden. And so if you somehow helping us to feel less like a burden would be very helpful. That's a great point, Krista. Jody says, love, gentleness, patience, understanding, listening. Those are all great things for caregivers. Yeah, top ideas. Yeah, it's hard to choose one. Julie says, not try to fix things, just support. Agreed. That's what I'm saying. Like, I know that caregivers, for me, I know that I need help fixing. But I also, it's really helpful for me to know that I am my caregiver to not just care for my physical being, but to care for the rest of me too. I know that's a big burden and that's really hard, but yeah, just supporting, not just fixing is good, but supporting and fixing is even better. Haley says, yes, I think caregiver and patient need to do normal things together too, if possible, like watch a movie or have conversations about things other than illness. So right, yes, your relationship with your caregiver isn't just caregiver-patient. For me, it's mom and daughter, or whatever it is for you guys. It's not. You have to make sure that you're building that relationship too, and not just focused on. Not that your relationship doesn't revolve around illness. It's so easy for that to happen, but it's important that your relationship is separate from illness in some ways too. It's always going to affect it, but it doesn't always have to dominate it. Kelly says, my husband is my caregiver and he does the physical things I can't, but he's literally never critical and believes in me. Huge help. Well, that's great, Kelly. I'm so glad for that, that you have that. And I'm glad you all understand brain fog. Very glad. Anne shared a link in the thing from something from Johnny Erickson Tata, who said, alone yet not alone. I'll have to watch that. Sounds good. You guys moved to Arizona. Prescott is actually not that far away from me, Heather. I'm so glad that doctor was able to help you. Natalie, who says she's both a caregiver and a patient, says that having a support network for the caregivers as they take care of an ill person is a huge help. Very true. I would encourage all caregivers to take care of yourself. One of the other big things that really helps us who are ill is that you take care of yourself, because when if you can't help us very much if you are not taking care of yourself. So take time away from us. Take time to take care of yourself. Find a support network for you. I wish I was hoping that I would be able to get a caregiver to give a talk for this conference, and unfortunately that has not happened. But yes, please take care of yourself. Well, we are past time again, so I'm going to say I'm going to sign off. And go ahead and click either in the link in the email you just got, or in the link in the description in the video down below, so that you can go on to the next session. It's a great one. It's very great. It's Benitha Rensnell Reisner. So see you in a bit.